introduction.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon, and I'm going to be here today to talk to you about assessing the job market. And when I use the term assess, I'm basically saying it in the pretext or the concept of looking at the pros and cons, or basically looking at what's going to bring value to you in your job search. Because as we all know, as adult providers of our household and our lives, we've heard the saying of time is money. Well, in a job transition, it really does bring home in the reality of time is money, depending on your own situation as far as how much time you have available to do your job transition. Before we get into the content today, I do need to just touch base with you and make sure you've all completed part one, which you're basically there assessing yourself and coming up with doing some analysis of yourself as far as your strengths and weaknesses, any skills gap, knowing where you want to go and how much time you have to get there. Has everybody completed part one?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that input. Okay, so what we're going to do today, I also refer to this as the 3 who's to make it a little bit easier to remember what we're going to go over. And the 3 who's basically have to do with, I brought this visual aid for you so that we can get kind of a picture of where we are and where we're going. Where we are we're not necessarily up here in the clouds, but if you think about being up in an airplane or up in a parachute and you look down, you kind of can see the water and the land, but you can't really see the distinction between the individual streets and trees and things like that. So up here, when we talk about our first who, we're talking about who's declining and who's growing. These are the industries or the economic segments that we may want to be looking at in the future as to who's growing and declining. It's real important to distinguish, and just because something is declining doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have any value. Because you could have been working for 20 years in a field that you love, that you're a master at, and you want to continue with that same pay level. It may be declining, but you may only have 5 more years to work. So there's nothing wrong with you considering, continuing in that industry, as well as the American way is always all about creativity and innovation. So something's declining right now, it may end up actually creating and innovating into something else, and you may have the best job you've ever had. So I just say, just because it shows up in declining doesn't mean it doesn't have any value. But if you have a lot more years ahead of you, you may be wanting to focus in really on those industries and segments that are growing. And that's going to be your future. So when you try to map out your career, you'll want to pay attention. You'll be able to do it in an industry that is growing. The second who out of our 3 who's is also these first 2 who's. They tell us a little bit about the type of information that we need to have. Versus the third one's going to tell us how to get it. On the second who, it's who's hiring in your geographic area that you've defined. When you did part 1, you basically decided whether you wanted to move out of town or stay in the local area or not. That's real important because now when you start focusing your energies, you're going to be in the geographic area. You're going to define it and be working in that area. Also, just to regress back up just a little bit up here, when we're talking about who's declining and who's growing, once you do decide on those industries, you want to master that industry. You want to know a lot about it. You want to be a consumer of it. Get involved in it as much as you can. Buy their products, know how it works, who they market to, and what's happening globally. And down here on this one, where you're determining who's hiring in your geographic area, it's really, really important that you create an emotional connection. And what that really means is you're going to go out and you're really going to get engaged in that industry, that your vocation, your profession. If this is what your passion is, if this is what you love, there's no reason for you to not be, number one, a contributor and be involved and engaged in it. So that brings us down to our third who, and that's who are you going to call? That sticks in my mind from the old Ghostbusters movie, who you going to call? I say who you going to call on. And this is all the resources that you may be using. And there's many, many resources. Let's just brainstorm a little bit. We've got a lot of talent and experience in this room. what are some resources that you would call on for doing a job search?
Internet.
Certainly, internet's our number one go-to place anymore these days. Other categories?
Friends and families.
Friends and families in their network that they would have. Hard copy, there's still hard copy sources available, and all, but we do rely on the internet an awful lot. But depending on, if you're up here on question 1 trying to find out who's growing and who's not, you're going to have a bigger picture versus when you get down into who's hiring in your local area, you're going to zero in on the local chapters of things and all. What I did when I was preparing for this is I actually learned something myself, and what I learned myself is, I use Google all the time, but there's other search engines out there, and so I just printed this off that you can, when I use the search engine Ask for Ask.com or Ask Jeeves, it pulled up a totally different approach to looking for growth industries or not. So I thought that's a real important point, because you're limiting yourself. If you're only using one search engine, you're kind of limiting yourself to one perspective on how to approach things. So there's plenty of resources out there. I have a handout for you to give you later. There's, when you do Google on the internet or search on the internet, there's marketing research that you can pay for, which is a little pricey, so you may or may not want to pay for it and all, but plenty of sources, professional magazines, and websites specifically for the profession. A lot of informational interviewing that you can do. That's real important, especially when you get down to who's hiring in your local area. Trying to make that connection. Your network, who's their network, who do they maybe know, and really just become involved in your vocation. And basically, I think that the important thing here is when I was doing my job transition, I was talking to my sister on the phone, and I had done a lot of different things. I have a real diverse background, which is a real strength and sometimes a minus on paper, but a real strength in reality. But she just used the phrase, she said, it sounds like you just need to find your people. And I was like, well, that's a little trite phrase, But then, after I heard that phrase, she referred me to this book by Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of GE. And he had written this book, and GE is a wonderful company, and they had a big presence where my sister lived. But in that, one of the chapters in there is all about finding your people. And he basically says, find your people and you'll never work another day in your life. And it was really stuck with me. I went and got the book, and I read that chapter first. And then I went back and read the other chapters and everything. But I thought it was very, very meaningful, so that you can end up going from over here with the big picture to over here, where you get the job that is the best fit for you, and hopefully get your pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here. So just in review today, we had the 3 who's declining and growing, who's hiring in your targeted area, and then who you're going to call on, what sources are you going to use. Well, thank you very much for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and good luck with your job search.
John.